The first laugh came from the far side of table 7, sharp enough to cut through the soft clink of silverware and the low patriotic music drifting beneath the chandeliers of the Ballantine Hotel in Charlotte, North Carolina. Outside the tall rain-streaked windows, a cold November storm washed over the valet lane, turning the polished black SUVs and silver Cadillacs into blurred reflections beneath the golden entry lights, while inside the ballroom, everything looked expensive, controlled, and painfully perfect. White linen tablecloths pressed without a wrinkle, mahogany chairs with smooth carved backs, folded navy blue napkins held by tiny brass rings shaped like eagles, crystal glasses catching the amber glow from the ceiling, and small American flags placed beside red roses at every centerpiece. The room smelled of roasted beef, buttered rolls, dark coffee, old leather, expensive perfume, and the faint waxy scent of polished wood, the kind of room where men measured each other by watch brands and women smiled with their eyes only when someone important walked by. Ethan James Reed stood near the payment table with his 9-year-old daughter Sophie beside him, his broad shoulders tense beneath a charcoal wool coat that had clearly seen more than one winter, his boots clean but worn at the edges, his dark hair touched with gray near the temples, his blue eyes steady but tired. He had only tried to pay the small $185 event registration balance before making a quiet donation for children of fallen service members. But the little black payment terminal blinked red. The young hotel employee swallowed hard, and the screen flashed the words, "No father wanted," read aloud in a room full of strangers. Declined. For half a second, Ethan did nothing. He looked at the machine, then at Sophie's small hand tightening around the fabric star made from her late mother's old navy jacket, and before he could calmly explain the bank security block he already understood, Blake, Harrington leaned back in his chair with a grin that carried across the room. "Well," Blake said, loud enough for the donors, the school board, and the children near the dessert table to hear. "A man who can't pay for dinner probably shouldn't pretend he belongs among real providers." A few people laughed immediately, then a few more followed, because cruelty sounded safer when it came from a rich man in a tailored suit. Sophie's face went pale, her shoulders folded inward, and Ethan felt the old naval discipline rise inside him like a locked door he was trying not to break. Before we go deeper into Ethan and Sophie's story, subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this remind us how quickly people judge what they do not understand. Ethan slid the declined card back into his wallet with controlled hands, but Sophie stared at the laughing adults as if each sound had landed on her dress, her shoes, her father's coat, and everything their small family had survived. The Liberty Fathers and Daughters Benefit Dinner had been advertised as an evening of honor, gratitude, and American family values, a fundraiser for scholarships given to children of veterans, police officers, firefighters, nurses, and emergency workers who had lost a parent in service. A brass plaque near the entrance displayed the words, "Duty, Family, Country," and beneath it stood framed photographs of Marines returning home, Army medics carrying children from floodwaters, Navy nurses tending wounded men, and fathers kneeling in airports to embrace daughters they had not seen in months. The Jefferson Heritage Academy Board had arranged the ballroom like a patriotic painting. Red, white, and blue ribbons along the stage, a folded ceremonial flag in a glass case near the silent auction table, and a large screen showing smiling families beneath the slogan, "No child of service left behind." Yet beneath that polished message, the room carried another truth. Wealth sat comfortably at every table. Men in navy blazers discussed private equity and second homes on Lake Norman. Mothers adjusted diamond bracelets, while reminding children not to spill sauce on dresses that cost more than a month of groceries for most families. Students compared ski trips, summer camps, and whose father had donated enough to get their name engraved on the new athletic center. Ethan had noticed all of it the moment he walked in, but he had come because Sophie had asked. She had seen the scholarship flyer in her backpack, had traced her finger over the picture of the flag, and had whispered that maybe her mom would have liked them to help. So he had put on his clean coat, combed her hair into a neat braid, pinned Rachel's little eagle brooch to her dress, and driven through the rain in his 10-year-old Ford pickup, while Sophie rehearsed the sentence she wanted to say if anyone asked about her mother. Now that same daughter stood beside him in a circle of laughter, her green eyes glossy, her lips pressed together, the selective silence that had followed Rachel's death beginning to lock her throat again. Ethan could feel people looking at his clothes, his truck keys, his ordinary wallet, and the card that had failed in front of everyone. The hotel employee, a young black woman named Maya Brooks with tired eyes and a name tag pinned slightly crooked to her vest, tried to speak gently. "Sir, it may just be a fraud hold," she said under her breath, her voice low enough to protect him. Ethan nodded once. "It is," he answered, calm but tight. "Give me 2 minutes." But Blake chuckled again, lifting his wine glass as if the humiliation were entertainment. "Take 10, he said. "Maybe call someone who actually has money." Ethan's jaw tightened, not because his pride had been wounded, but because Sophie had heard every word. He had survived naval inspections, hurricane supply missions, congressional hearings, estate lawyers, greedy cousins, and the kind of grief that made a man forget the sound of his own laughter. But nothing in his life had prepared him for the sight of his little girl trying not to cry because strangers thought her father was poor. She wore a simple navy dress he had hemmed himself at the kitchen table the night before, his large hands clumsy with the needle, Rachel's sewing kit open beside him, Sophie asleep on the couch with a library book on her chest. The tiny stitches near the bottom were uneven, and now Ethan saw Vanessa Harrington glance at them with a look of polished pity before leaning toward another mother and whispering behind her hand. At the head table, Headmaster Charles Whitcomb shifted uncomfortably, not because Ethan had been insulted, but because the board members were watching, and reputation was a delicate thing in rooms built on donations. He approached with the soft, careful smile of a man trained to remove problems without appearing unkind. "Mr. Reed," he said, lowering his voice, "but not enough. Perhaps you and your daughter could step into the lobby while this is sorted out. We don't want the evening disrupted." Ethan looked at him, and for one dangerous second the air around him changed. He did not raise his voice. He did not move toward Blake. He did not announce who he was. He simply placed one hand on Sophie's shoulder, feeling the tremor beneath the thin fabric of her dress, and said, "My daughter is not a disruption." The words were quiet, but they landed harder than shouting. Maya stopped wiping the table. The nearest guests stopped smiling. Sophie looked up at him, and something in her expression broke Ethan more deeply than the laughter had. She was not embarrassed because the card declined. She was terrified he would choose silence again. Since Rachel's death, Ethan had taught her to keep going, to be kind, to never brag, to never answer cruelty with cruelty, to never let money decide a person's worth. But in that ballroom, under those chandeliers and flags, surrounded by people praising sacrifice while mocking a father in front of his child, Sophie needed something more than restraint. She needed proof that dignity was not the same as disappearing. Blake pushed back his chair, still grinning, and said, "Come on, Reed. Don't make it dramatic. Some fathers provide. Some fathers pretend." The room seemed to narrow around Sophie. The music, the rain, the clatter from the kitchen doors, the whispers from the parents, even Blake's smug breathing blurred into one heavy pressure against her chest. Her fingers crushed the little uniform star until the stitched edges pressed into her palm. For 3 years, adults had spoken over her grief in soft voices. Teachers had said she was adjusting. Counselors had said she needed time. Children had said her father was weird, poor, too quiet, maybe ashamed. But Sophie remembered the nights Ethan sat on the bathroom floor while she cried until she threw up. The mornings he braided her hair, wrong, and started over without complaining. The way he packed notes in her lunchbox that said, "Mom would be proud of you today." The way he stood at Rachel's grave every Memorial Day with his back straight and his hand over his heart, even when no one else was watching. She remembered him staying. That was the word Blake had not earned the right to touch. Ethan felt Sophie move before he saw it. She stepped half a pace forward, tiny beside the payment table, pale under the ballroom lights, her braids slipping over one shoulder, her chin trembling so violently that Ethan almost pulled her back. But she lifted her eyes toward Blake Harrington, toward the laughing parents, toward the headmaster who wanted her hidden in the lobby, and from a throat that had failed her in classrooms, doctor's offices, and birthday parties. She forced out a sentence that made the room go still. "My dad doesn't pretend," Sophie said, each word small but clear. "He stayed." Silence fell so completely that even the rain against the windows seemed louder. Ethan stared at his daughter, and the old guilt he had carried like an anchor shifted inside him. He had spent 3 years hiding the Reed American Legacy Trust, hiding the money, hiding the power, hiding from relatives and opportunists and every person who might see Sophie as an inheritance instead of a child. He had believed secrecy was protection, but now, watching his daughter defend his worth in front of people who had mistaken humility for failure, he understood the mistake. A father did not need to show off his strength, but he did need to show his child that truth could stand upright. Ethan slowly took out his phone, scrolled past the blocked bank alert, and called Margaret Collins, director of the Reed family office. When she answered, he looked straight at Blake and said, "Margaret, I need the trust documents brought to the Ballantine tonight, and authorize an immediate charitable transfer account. Sophie and I are done, letting small people decide what a family is worth." 3 years before the night at the Ballantine, Ethan Reed had been known in very different rooms for a very different kind of silence. In boardrooms in Washington, D.C., Norfolk, and New York, men twice as loud and half as disciplined learned not to mistake his calm for weakness. He had spent 11 years in the U.S. Navy Supply Corps, where panic was a luxury nobody could afford, especially when hurricanes closed ports. Medical supplies sat, trapped behind bureaucracy, and young American service members were waiting on equipment that could mean the difference between coming home whole or coming home in a flag-draped coffin. Ethan had never been the kind of officer who gave speeches just to hear his own voice. He was the kind who read every manifest, called every warehouse, checked every fuel line, and stayed awake until the last shipment moved. His father, William Reed, had raised him on 2 sentences. "Your word is your uniform. Even when you take the uniform off," and "a man protects his family without asking the world to applaud." Those sentences had followed Ethan through deployment, marriage, fatherhood, grief, and the inheritance he never wanted people to see before they saw him. The Reed American Legacy Trust had been built by his grandfather after World War II, expanded through trucking, medical equipment, logistics contracts, farmland, and commercial real estate, and protected by layers of trustees and lawyers, who used phrases like asset shielding, succession structure, and risk exposure. But to Ethan, all those millions carried the smell of his father's old leather briefcase, the sound of his mother balancing grocery receipts even after they became wealthy, and the memory of family dinners where patriotism meant bowing your head for those overseas, standing when the flag passed, and never confusing blessing with entitlement. Rachel had been the one person who never seemed impressed by any of it. Ethan met her at a veterans medical center outside Norfolk when he was 31, and she was a 30-year-old emergency nurse with tired green eyes, dark hair pinned carelessly behind her ears, and the kind of steady hands that made wounded men stop pretending they were fine. He had arrived in uniform to coordinate a supply donation from the Reed Family Foundation, and she had caught him correcting a delivery label himself because the boxes had been sent to the wrong floor. "Most donors just take a photo and leave," she said, arms folded, a faint challenge in her voice. Ethan looked up from the clipboard and answered, "Most labels don't move themselves." That was the beginning of them. Rachel did not care about private clubs, donor walls, or the trustees who followed Ethan like cautious shadows. She cared whether the blankets were warm, whether the widower in room 214 had eaten, whether the young Marine with a missing hand had someone to call on Christmas. She had grown up in a working-class military family in Wilmington, North Carolina, and believed America was not merely a place on a map, but a promise people had to keep renewing through decency. When Ethan brought her to meet relatives who smiled too widely at the mention of the trust, Rachel squeezed his hand beneath the table and later told him, "You know, money makes some people taller and some people smaller. Try not to become either." She married him in a small chapel with an American flag near the altar, wore her mother's pearls, danced barefoot at the reception, and told Ethan during their first dance that if they ever had a child, that child would know more about gratitude than inheritance. Sophie was born on a bright April morning after 18 hours of labor, red-faced, furious and loud enough that Rachel laughed through tears and said, "Well, she has opinions." Ethan remembered holding his daughter for the first time with the same fear he had felt before dangerous missions, except this fear came wrapped in a hospital blanket with a pink stripe and tiny fists. He became gentle in ways he had not known he could be. He learned the difference between cries, memorized the weight of formula cans, researched car seats like defense contracts, and stood in the nursery at 2 in the morning whispering Old Navy cadence under his breath because Sophie calmed when he kept rhythm. Rachel returned to nursing part-time, then to volunteer work with families of injured veterans, and their home became a place where casseroles appeared for widows. Children of deployed parents slept on the couch during emergencies, and Ethan's money quietly paid medical bills nobody ever knew had been paid. They lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. Rachel drove a used Subaru. Ethan wore the same field jacket until the cuffs frayed. Sophie's birthday parties were backyard cookouts with grilled hot dogs, lemonade, cheap paper flags, and Rachel reminding everyone that children needed muddy knees more than perfect photographs. The trust remained in the background, powerful, but not central. Ethan had believed he was balancing it well then. Enough structure to protect the future, enough humility to preserve the soul of his family. He did not yet understand how quickly balance could turn into guilt. The accident happened on a Thursday evening in late October when the rain came hard across I-77 and Rachel was driving home from the Veterans Clinic after covering an extra shift for a nurse whose son had the flu. Ethan was in Washington, D.C., sitting across from 3 attorneys and 2 trustees, reviewing proposed changes after his father's death had made him the eventual controlling beneficiary of the Reed American Legacy Trust. Rachel had called at 5:42 p.m. He let it go to voicemail because one of the lawyers was explaining tax exposure related to a medical equipment subsidiary, and Ethan had thought he would call back in 10 minutes. At 6:11 p.m., a drunk driver crossed 2 lanes, near an exit ramp outside Charlotte, and hit Rachel's Subaru on the driver's side. By the time Ethan's phone rang again, this time from a state trooper, Sophie was sitting in a school auditorium wearing a paper star on her dress, waiting for both parents to arrive for a Veterans Day rehearsal. Ethan made it to the hospital after midnight. Rachel was already gone. The nurse handed him Rachel's wedding ring in a small plastic bag, and Ethan held it with both hands as if pressure could reverse time. In the days that followed, people told him it was not his fault. The police report said it was not his fault. The prosecutor said it was not his fault. Even Sophie, too young to understand the full shape of grief, touched his face during the funeral and whispered, "Daddy, Mommy knew you were coming." But Ethan built a prison out of the fact that he had not answered the call, had not left the meeting, had not been in the auditorium seat Rachel had promised Sophie they would fill together. After Rachel's death, Ethan changed without announcing it. He resigned from every public charity board connected to the Reed name, stopped attending donor dinners, moved his trust meetings behind closed doors, and instructed Margaret Collins to limit public references to him wherever legally possible. He sold the larger house Rachel had never liked and bought a modest brick home on a quiet street shaded by old oak trees, where the neighbors left casseroles on the porch and did not ask what he was worth. He kept the Ford pickup because Sophie said it still smelled a little like her mother's hand lotion from the glove compartment. He learned to pack lunches with apple slices cut into small moons, to braid hair from online videos, to sit outside Sophie's bedroom when nightmares came, and to answer questions no father wanted to answer. "Is Mom cold?" Sophie asked once. Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, felt something rip inside him, and answered, "No, baby. She is loved. People who are loved are never alone." But Sophie became quieter each month. At school, she spoke when required, then less, then almost never in crowded rooms. Doctors called it anxiety after trauma. Teachers called it adjustment. Ethan called it the sound grief made when it moved into a child's throat. He took her to therapy, drove her to appointments, signed every form, and sat in waiting rooms under fluorescent lights while other parents scrolled phones and complained about soccer schedules. Yet he also hid more, and more of himself, believing that if no one knew about the trust, no one could use Sophie, exploit her, resent her, or circle their grief with open palms. Jefferson Heritage Academy had seemed safe at first. The school advertised discipline, academic excellence, respect for American tradition, and a scholarship program for families connected to service. Its brick buildings stood behind iron gates in a wealthy part of Charlotte, with manicured lawns, white columns, and a flag raised every morning by 2 students selected for citizenship awards. Sophie received admission after Rachel's former colleague recommended the school's counseling support, and Ethan paid full tuition through a private education account without attaching the Reed name to any major donation. He attended parent meetings in work boots when he came straight from inspecting a warehouse property, and some parents decided before he opened his mouth who he must be. They saw the old truck, the plain coat, the way he skipped silent auction cocktails, the fact that Sophie wore repeated dresses, and they filed him into the category that made them comfortable. Struggling single father, maybe proud, maybe out of place, certainly not useful. Ethan noticed, of course. He noticed everything, but he told himself that letting them underestimate him was safer than inviting them closer. "We don't need to prove anything," he told Sophie one afternoon when a girl laughed at her backpack. Sophie looked out the passenger window and asked, "But what if they think Mom didn't matter because we don't look important?" Ethan had no good answer. He only reached across the console, held her hand and said, "Your mother mattered before anyone clapped, and she matters now." It was true, but it was incomplete. Children do not only need truth spoken softly in cars. Sometimes they need truth defended where the lie was told. Blake Harrington entered their lives slowly, the way some men spread poison while calling it leadership. He was 46, handsome in a hard, polished way, with silver at his temples, a permanent tan, and the restless confidence of a man who believed every room had a scoreboard. He sold luxury properties around Lake Norman, chaired the school's capital campaign committee, and made sure every donation appeared in newsletters with his family name spelled correctly. His daughter Madison was in Sophie's grade, and while Madison herself was not cruel every day, she had learned her father's language of ranking people. She asked Sophie why her father drove a construction truck, why Sophie never went to Aspen, and whether her dress came from a thrift store. Sophie usually looked down and said nothing. Once, when Ethan picked her up early after a difficult therapy session, he overheard Blake near the school entrance telling another father, "Jefferson used to be selective. Now every charity case with a sad story wants a seat." Ethan stopped walking for one measured breath. His old self, the officer who could dismantle incompetence with 3 sentences, wanted to turn around. Instead, he guided Sophie toward the truck because she was already shaking. That night, he stood over the kitchen sink long after she slept, washing the same coffee mug again and again, furious at Blake, furious at the school, but most of all furious at himself for hesitating. He had built his restraint into a moral identity. He had told himself good conduct meant never lowering himself to arrogant men. But there was another form of cowardice that dressed itself as restraint, and he was beginning to suspect he had worn it too long. Maya Brooks had first noticed Ethan and Sophie before the card incident, not because they looked poor, but because they looked lonely. She was 24, worked breakfast shifts at the hotel, evening events when she could get them, and weekend hours at a diner near South Boulevard. Her father, Sergeant Anthony Brooks, had served in the U.S. Army and returned from Iraq with a limp, headaches, and a deep discomfort around fireworks. Maya had grown up watching her mother stretch paychecks, argue with insurance offices, and iron her father's dress uniform for ceremonies where officials thanked him with words but sent him home to fight paperwork alone. So when she saw Sophie's little eagle brooch, the careful braid, the way Ethan stood with a protective angle between his daughter and the crowd, she recognized a service family even before anyone said so. Earlier that evening, Maya had bent down near the dessert table and asked Sophie whether she wanted a small plate of strawberries before the chocolate fountain line got busy. Sophie had looked at Ethan for permission, then nodded without speaking. Maya smiled and said, "My dad used to say strawberries taste better before rich people start forming opinions around them." Sophie had almost smiled. Ethan had noticed that almost smile and quietly thanked Maya. "She likes when people don't push," he said. Maya shrugged, but kindly. "People who've been through something usually do." Those few words stayed with Ethan because they did not sound like pity. They sounded like knowledge earned the hard way. In that ballroom full of donors using service as decor, Maya was one of the first people who looked at Sophie as a child, not as a symbol. The hours before the humiliation had been filled with small wounds that Ethan tried to absorb before Sophie could feel them. At check-in, a volunteer asked whether he was with facilities before glancing at his invitation. At the coat area, one father looked at Ethan's worn cuffs and asked which contracting company he owned, then lost interest when Ethan simply said logistics. During dinner, Vanessa Harrington praised Sophie's brooch with the brittle sweetness of a woman who wanted to sound gracious while looking for weakness. "How creative," she said. "Did you make that yourselves?" Sophie touched the eagle and whispered, "It was my mom's." Vanessa's smile faltered for only a second before she answered, "How sentimental." Ethan wanted to leave then, but Sophie had pointed to the silent auction display near the stage, where the framed flag and the scholarship plaque stood beneath a spotlight. "Dad," she whispered, "can we help them? For kids like the ones Mom cared about?" He looked at the flag, then at the small seriousness in his daughter's face, and he knew leaving would teach the wrong lesson. Rachel had never walked away from hurting people because the room was uncomfortable. So Ethan nodded. "We can help," he said, quietly. That word, quietly, had become his method of surviving. Quiet donations, quiet grief, quiet strength, quiet avoidance. He did not know yet that the night would force him to decide whether quietness had become a wall between his daughter and the dignity she deserved to see. After Sophie's sentence silenced the room, Ethan's call to Margaret Collins set forces in motion outside the ballroom. Margaret was 61, a former banking executive with iron gray hair, a precise navy suit, and the unflappable manner of someone who had handled billion-dollar disputes without raising her voice. She had worked with William Reed for 17 years and had promised him she would protect Ethan from both predators and himself, because William understood that grief could make honorable men disappear. When Ethan called, Margaret immediately heard something beneath his calm. "Are you and Sophie safe?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said, eyes still on Blake. "But I need documentation, authorization capacity, and the charitable transfer structure ready tonight." There was a pause. "Ethan," Margaret said carefully, "public exposure carries consequences." He looked down at Sophie, who was still standing too straight for a child, still breathing too shallowly, still waiting to learn whether truth would be hidden again. "So does silence," he answered. Margaret did not argue after that. Within minutes, she contacted the regional banking president, the trust attorney already in Charlotte for a scheduled morning review, and the security driver assigned for sensitive document transport. In the ballroom, however, nobody knew any of this yet. Blake only saw Ethan on the phone and mistook it for desperation. "Calling your cousin for a loan?" he asked, drawing a nervous laugh from one corner of the room. Ethan ended the call, placed the phone in his pocket, and looked at Sophie. "You did?" "Nothing wrong," he said. Sophie's lips trembled. "You didn't either," she whispered. It was the second sentence she had spoken in front of all those people, and it struck him like grace he had not earned. Headmaster Whitcomb tried to regain control by inviting Ethan into a side hallway, but Ethan refused to leave Sophie standing alone. "Anything you need to say can be said here," Ethan told him. The headmaster adjusted his tie, his face tightening under the pressure of watching donors watch him. "Mr. Reed, this is a family event. I'm trying to preserve the tone of the evening." Ethan's eyes moved toward the stage, toward the photographs of soldiers and nurses, toward the plaque promising that no child of service would be left behind. "The tone was broken when a child was laughed at," he said, "not when her father's card declined." A mother at the next table looked down at her plate, ashamed but silent. Another father shifted as if he wanted to speak, but could not afford to offend Blake. Harrington before a business deal closed. That was the sickness of the room, Ethan realized. Not everyone there was cruel. Some were weak, some were afraid. Some had mortgages, contracts, reputations, and children in the same school. They had traded moral courage for social convenience, one small silence at a time. Ethan knew that trade too well because he had made his own version of it. He had traded public truth for privacy, confrontation for safety, Rachel's broad service-minded generosity for a narrow life designed around avoiding pain. Sophie moved closer to him, and he rested his hand lightly between her shoulder blades. Her dress fabric was thin beneath his palm, and he remembered Rachel saying years earlier, while folding baby clothes, "Promise me she'll never learn to shrink just to make powerful people comfortable." Ethan had promised. In that moment, he understood that a promise made to the dead still demanded action from the living. While they waited, Maya returned with a small glass of water for Sophie and placed it on the edge of the payment table without making a performance of kindness. "No charge," she said softly, then immediately looked embarrassed by the joke, as if afraid it might hurt. Sophie surprised her by letting out the smallest breath of a laugh. Ethan noticed and gave Maya a grateful nod. Blake saw the exchange and scoffed. "Careful," he said to Maya. "You start comping drinks, this whole table might go under." Maya's face hardened, but she kept her voice professional. "Sir, she's a child." Vanessa touched Blake's sleeve, whispering his name in warning. But Blake had already committed to the role of the man who owned the room. "And children should learn early," he said, "that not every place is meant for them." That sentence changed the emotional temperature around Ethan more than the first insult had. His posture did not shift dramatically, but the people closest to him felt something settle. Sophie looked up, afraid now not for herself, but for Maya, because she understood when adults like Blake aimed cruelty downward. Ethan turned fully toward Blake. "My daughter will learn exactly that," he said. "She'll learn some places are built by men who confuse price with worth. She'll also learn those places can be changed." Blake laughed, but it came out thinner than before. "By you?" Ethan held his gaze. "If necessary." Maya glanced between them, sensing there was more in Ethan's words than his coat and truck suggested. Sophie sensed it too. For the first time that night, she was not only frightened, she was watching her father become someone she had only seen in old photographs. Straight-backed, clear-eyed, carrying authority without needing permission from anyone in the room. Ethan's mind moved through the obstacles ahead with the same structured clarity he once used during naval crises. If he revealed the trust, people would search his name before midnight. Relatives who had been quiet would resurface. Opportunists would contact the school. Security protocols for Sophie would need updating. The trustees would worry about precedent, privacy, and reputational exposure. The press might twist the story into rich man shames school donors, when the real story was simpler and harder. A child had been humiliated in a room that claimed to honor children of service. He also knew that a dramatic donation could become vanity if not structured carefully. Rachel would hate that. She used to say charity without accountability was just applause with paperwork. If Ethan acted tonight, the money had to build something that lasted longer than outrage. It had to pay tuition, therapy, transportation, uniforms, books, meals, legal support, and emergency grants without forcing grieving families to parade their pain for donors. He looked at the scholarship banner again and saw it differently now. The slogan was not wrong. It was incomplete. No child of service should be left behind, but they should not have to be displayed to be helped. Sophie leaned against his side, exhaustion beginning to replace adrenaline. "Daddy," she whispered, "are we in trouble?" He crouched slightly so his face was level with hers. "No, Grace," he said, using the middle name Rachel had chosen. "We're going to tell the truth and then we're going to do what we came here to do." Sophie searched his face. "Will people be mad?" Ethan glanced at Blake, at the headmaster, at the silent parents, then back at his daughter. "Some people get angry when they lose the right to look down on you," he said. "That doesn't make you wrong." By the time the ballroom doors opened again, the benefit dinner no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom without a judge, everyone waiting for evidence they had not expected to matter. The storm outside had intensified, rain striking the windows in silver lines, the flags in the centerpieces trembling slightly whenever the air conditioning shifted overhead. The servers had stopped moving with their earlier practiced elegance and now clustered near the side doors, pretending not to watch. Children sensed adult tension and grew quiet. On the stage, the slideshow still played images of smiling service families, but nobody was looking at it anymore. Ethan stood beside Sophie, one hand resting gently on her shoulder, the other relaxed at his side. He was no longer trying to make himself smaller. Maya remained a few steps away, not intruding, but close enough that Sophie could see one friendly face in the crowd. Blake's confidence had begun to fray, though he covered it by checking his phone and muttering to the men beside him. Headmaster Whitcomb's expression shifted between irritation and calculation. He did not yet know whether Ethan was a problem to remove or a person to please. That uncertainty exposed him more clearly than open cruelty would have. Then Margaret Collins entered the ballroom with two men behind her, one carrying a slim leather document case, the other recognized immediately by several donors as the regional president of Carolina Federal Bank. Margaret did not hurry. She walked across the polished floor with the quiet authority of a woman who had never needed a chandelier to make people notice her. When she reached Ethan, she did not look at Blake first, or the headmaster, or the donors. She looked at Sophie. "Miss Reed," Margaret said gently, "your grandfather would have been very proud of how you stood beside your father tonight." Sophie blinked, confused by the respect in the woman's voice. Ethan felt his throat tighten. The past had arrived carrying documents, but the future was standing beside him in a navy dress, learning that her family's worth had never depended on a payment terminal. Margaret Collins placed the leather document case on the edge of the payment table with such controlled calm that the simple movement seemed louder than Blake Harrington's laughter had been. The bank president, Daniel Lee. Mercer stood beside her in a dark suit, damp at the shoulders from the storm outside, his expression professional but uneasy, because he recognized half the donors in the room and understood, faster than most of them did, that something irreversible had just begun. The trust attorney, Jonathan Price, opened the case and removed a folder embossed with the Reed family seal, then a printed authorization summary, then a sealed verification letter from Carolina Federal's private banking division. Ethan did not reach for the papers immediately. He kept his eyes on Sophie, because the mistake he had made for 3 years was believing documents could protect what only courage could protect. Headmaster Whitcomb stepped forward with a smile that had changed shape in the last 10 minutes, softer now, almost eager. "Mr. Reed," he said, "perhaps we should handle this privately." Ethan looked at the stage behind him, where the scholarship banner still promised honor, duty, and family beneath a projected photograph of a little girl hugging a soldier in uniform. "No," he answered. "My daughter was embarrassed publicly. The truth can stand in the same room." Margaret opened the folder and spoke clearly, not theatrically, not cruelly, but with the exactness of a woman who respected facts too much to dress them up. She confirmed that Ethan James Reed was the successor administrator and controlling beneficiary of the Reed American Legacy Trust, a family trust with a current audited valuation of $903,700,000, including logistics holdings, medical equipment equity, commercial real estate, treasury instruments, and privately managed charitable assets. A silence moved through the ballroom like a physical thing. Forks stopped halfway to plates. A woman near the auction display lowered her phone. Vanessa Harrington's mouth parted slightly, her practiced smile gone. Blake blinked once, then twice, as if the words were in a language he understood individually, but could not assemble into a sentence that included the man in the worn coat. Daniel Mercer then stepped forward and explained that the declined payment had resulted from an automatic fraud lock on a small household account after attempted unauthorized charges in Atlanta, and that it had no connection whatsoever to Mr. Reed's available assets, creditworthiness, or trust-controlled funds. Maya, still near the table with the water glass in her hand, looked from Ethan to Sophie and back again, not with greed or shock, but with the kind of sadness that comes when a decent person realizes how much cruelty had been built on a false assumption. Sophie pressed closer to Ethan. She did not look proud. She looked overwhelmed. That wounded him more than Blake's insult, because he had not wanted his daughter to learn that money could make cruel people quiet. He wanted her to learn that truth could. Blake gave a short laugh, brittle and desperate. "Well, Reed, you could have just said you were loaded," he said, trying to pull the room back toward humor. "No need for the federal case." Ethan turned toward him slowly. His voice stayed low. "You didn't laugh because you thought I had no money, Blake. You laughed because you thought that gave you permission." Blake's face flushed. Nobody joined him now. Ethan slid the declined card onto the table beside the trust documents, placing the small plastic rectangle next to nearly $1 billion in verified. authority, and the contrast was so sharp that even the children in the room seemed to understand it. "This card measures a transaction," Ethan said. "It does not measure a father. It does not measure a child. It does not measure a family that buried someone and kept going." Headmaster Whitcomb began apologizing before Ethan had finished speaking, but the apology carried the smell of fear, not remorse. "Mr. Reed, I deeply regret the misunderstanding," he said, the word misunderstanding landing badly in a room that had witnessed exactly what happened. Ethan's eyes narrowed just enough for the headmaster to stop. "There was no misunderstanding," Ethan said. "A child was shamed. A staff member was mocked for showing kindness. A father was told he didn't belong in a room built around honoring families of service. That is not a misunderstanding. That is culture." He looked toward the tables, not accusing every person equally, but refusing to let anyone hide completely. "Some of you laughed. Some of you recorded. Some of you looked down because you knew it was wrong and decided wrong was safer than uncomfortable. I know that choice. I've made my own version of it." His voice shifted then, not weaker, but more human, and Sophie heard something in it she had only heard at her mother's grave. "After my wife died, I thought keeping everything quiet would protect my daughter. I thought if no one saw the trust, no one would see her as money. I thought if we lived simply enough, the world would leave her alone." He paused, swallowing the grief that still rose whenever Rachel's absence entered a room. But silence can protect a bank account and still fail a child. Sophie looked up quickly, tears gathering at the edges of her green eyes. Ethan crouched in front of her, in the middle of the ballroom, no longer caring who watched. The polished floor reflected the chandelier light around them. The rain tapped the windows. The little fabric star trembled in her hand. "Sophie." "Grace Reed," he said, using her full name with the tenderness Rachel used to use when tying her shoes. "I owe you an apology." She shook her head immediately. "No, Daddy." "Yes," he said softly. "I taught you to be humble, but I let you think humility meant taking every insult quietly. I taught you not to brag, but I did not teach you soon enough that you are allowed to stand tall. I hid the money because I was scared of what it could do to us, but I also hid part of your mother's work because she never believed blessings were meant to sit behind locked doors." Sophie's lips quivered. "Mom helped people." "She did," Ethan said, "and I stopped helping the way she would have wanted because every time I touched that money, I remembered the night I didn't answer her call." A soft sound moved through the room, not gossip this time, but the uncomfortable recognition of grief revealed too plainly to dismiss. Sophie reached out and put both hands on her father's face, the same way she had done at Rachel's funeral when she was 6. "You came back," she whispered. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second, and when he opened them, the change in him was visible. The guilt had not vanished. Grief does not disappear because a child forgives what a man cannot forgive in himself. But something had loosened. He turned back to the room with Sophie's hand still in his. "My wife believed America is strongest when families who serve are not abandoned after the speech's end," he said. "Tonight, my daughter reminded me that staying present is not enough if I stay silent when the values we claim are being betrayed right in front of us." Daniel Mercer asked Ethan whether he wanted the original $25,000 donation processed through the school's existing benefit account, and that question became the hinge on which the entire night turned. The headmaster's eyes brightened too quickly. Several board members straightened. Blake, still pale, attempted to recover by smoothing his tie and saying, "Look, if this is about the scholarship fund, we're all on the same team here." Ethan looked at him for a long second. "No," he said. "We are not." He picked up the printed event brochure from the table and opened it to the scholarship description. Families must submit income disclosures, medical records, service documentation, letters of hardship, proof of death or disability, and personal statements describing the emotional impact on the child, he read, each requirement colder than the last. Then selected stories are presented at donor events unless families opt out in writing through a secondary review process. His voice hardened. "You turn grief into paperwork and then into decoration." Headmaster Whitcomb shifted defensively. "Those procedures are standard for accountability." Maya spoke before she seemed to decide whether she should. "My mother filled out forms like that for 2 years after my dad came home injured. she said, her voice shaking but clear. Every office thanked him for his service and then asked her to prove we were struggling again. Several people turned toward her, some annoyed that a hotel employee had spoken, others ashamed because they knew she was right. Ethan looked at Maya with respect. "What's your father's name?" he asked. "Sergeant Anthony Brooks, U.S. Army," she said. Ethan nodded once. "Then this room owes your family better than a brochure." He faced Margaret. "Prepare a restricted charitable commitment, $30 million to establish the Rachel Reed Families of Service Fund, independent of Jefferson Heritage Academy, with audited public reporting, trauma counseling, tuition assistance, emergency grants, transportation support, and legal guidance for children of fallen or disabled service members, law enforcement officers, firefighters, nurses, and emergency responders." Margaret's pen moved immediately across her tablet. A murmur broke out, then died when Ethan continued. "No child's pain will be used in a fundraising video without guardian consent. No family will be forced to perform their grief for donors. No board member will have private influence over awards. And the first outside advisory seat will be offered to someone who understands the cost of service after the ceremonies end." He turned to Maya. "If you are willing, Miss Brooks, I would like you to help us build it when you finish your nursing program." Maya's face changed. For a moment she looked exactly like what she was, a young woman exhausted from surviving, suddenly seen by someone with the power to do more than say thank you. "I'm not qualified for something like that," she whispered. Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "You recognized my daughter's dignity before anyone recognized my name. That is a qualification this room badly needs." Blake pushed his chair back so abruptly that one of the glasses rattled. "This is ridiculous," he said, because anger was the last shelter left for his embarrassment. "You walk in here dressed like a handyman? Let everyone think you're broke, and now you want to lecture us about dignity?" Vanessa touched his arm again, this time with real fear, but Blake pulled away. Ethan did not rise to meet the volume. His calm had become heavier than anger. "I didn't let you do anything," Ethan said. "You chose who to be when you thought there would be no consequence." Blake pointed toward the declined card. Any normal person would have explained. Ethan's eyes sharpened. Any decent person would have waited. The sentence landed like a gavel. Blake looked around for support, but the men who had laughed with him now studied their plates, and the women who had smiled at Vanessa's whispers checked on their children, as if concern could erase participation. Ethan turned to Headmaster Whitcomb. "The fund will consider partnership with Jefferson Heritage only after 3 conditions are met. A full independent audit of scholarship spending for the past 5 years, removal of Mr. Harrington from any committee involving financial aid or service families, and a written dignity policy protecting students from donor retaliation, class-based harassment, and public humiliation." Whitcomb's face tightened. "Mr. Harrington is one of our largest contributors." Ethan nodded. "Then your first reform will be deciding whether a school that teaches character can afford money that comes without it." The room went utterly still again. Sophie watched her father, not as a hidden millionaire, not as a man finally winning, but as the father who had packed her lunches, sat through nightmares, and now stood between her and a room full of people who had tried to make her small. She stepped closer to the table, still gripping the fabric star, and looked at Blake. Her voice was quiet, but it did not vanish this time. "My mom used to say helping people shouldn't make them feel ashamed." Ethan's breath caught. There was Rachel, not in a photograph or a ring or a folded uniform, but in the sentence of their child. Blake opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time that night, he had no easy cruelty left. Ethan placed one hand gently on Sophie's back and said, "Your mother was right." Then he turned to Daniel Mercer. "Authorize the first transfer tonight. $1 million into an operating account for immediate scholarship and emergency assistance, pending the full endowment structure. The rest will follow through the trust once Margaret completes the governance documents." Daniel nodded, already typing. Margaret looked at Ethan with something like relief, as if she had been waiting 3 years to see him return not to wealth, but to purpose. The greatest change in the room did not come when people learned Ethan had $900 million behind his name. It came when Sophie stopped hiding behind his coat. She walked to Maya. took the untouched glass of water from the table, and held it in both hands for a moment before speaking. "Thank you for being nice before you knew," she said. Maya's eyes filled instantly, and she crouched so Sophie would not have to look up. "Your dad was right," Maya said. "You did nothing wrong." Sophie nodded, then turned back to Ethan. "Can we still help the kids?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said, "but the right way. And can we put Mom's name on it?" The room blurred for him then, not from weakness, but from the force of love pressing against grief. Ethan had avoided Rachel's name in public because every syllable reopened the hospital corridor, the plastic bag, the voicemail he had not answered. But Sophie was asking him to stop treating her mother's memory like something fragile enough to break if spoken aloud. He knelt again, no shame in the tears standing in his eyes. "We can," he said, "and we will." Sophie placed the fabric star in his palm. "Then don't hide her anymore." Ethan closed his fingers around the worn cloth, and the transformation completed itself, quietly, without applause. He had entered the hotel trying to protect his daughter from the world by keeping their life small. He now understood that protection sometimes meant making the truth large enough for others to stand beneath it. He rose, faced the ballroom, and said, "My wife Rachel served families who gave more to this country than most people ever see. My daughter spoke tonight because she remembered what I forgot. Dignity is not something the powerful hand down. It is something every child already owns." For several seconds, no one moved. Then an older man at the back, a retired Marine with a silver cane and tears on his face, stood and placed his hand over his heart. Maya stood next, then a father from another table, then a mother who had stayed silent too long. It was not applause at first. It was acknowledgement. Ethan did not look at Blake. He looked only at Sophie, and Sophie looked back without shrinking. If this story of a humble single dad proving everyone wrong has you watching until the end, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more emotional stories of sacrifice, hidden strength, and unforgettable twists. Now let's get back to the video. That night, the declined card remained on the payment table until the ballroom emptied. A small red failure beside documents proving nearly $1 billion, and everyone who passed it understood the same uncomfortable truth. The card had not exposed Ethan Reed. It had exposed them. In the weeks that followed, the story of the declined card moved through Charlotte faster than Ethan wanted, but not in the cheap way Blake Harrington had hoped when he first saw phones lifted in the ballroom. The full video appeared online after one parent, ashamed of having stayed silent, sent it to another family with a message that said, "This is what our children are learning from us." By Monday morning, Jefferson Heritage Academy's board had received hundreds of emails, not from strangers hungry for scandal, but from parents, veterans, nurses, firefighters, and former students who recognized the deeper wound beneath the laughter. Headmaster Whitcomb issued a public apology that Ethan refused to help polish. Blake Harrington resigned from the Financial Aid Committee after the board opened an independent review. And though he tried to call Ethan twice through mutual contacts, Ethan did not accept a private apology designed to avoid public accountability. The audit found wasteful spending, donor favoritism, and humiliating scholarship practices, but not the dramatic criminal conspiracy that gossip pages wanted. Ethan was almost relieved by that, because real life rarely needed cartoon villains to damage children. Ordinary pride, cowardice, and unchecked money could do enough. At home, Sophie watched none of the videos. Ethan made sure of that. Instead, they returned to their quiet kitchen with the oak table Rachel had loved, the blue ceramic mugs she used to collect, and the refrigerator covered with Sophie's drawings. On the first Sunday after the dinner, Ethan set out bread, turkey, apples, bottled water, and handwritten notes for a veterans outreach center near downtown Charlotte. Sophie stood beside him in one of Rachel's old sweatshirts, sleeves rolled twice, and asked whether people would think they were doing it because of the video. Ethan paused, then handed her a marker. "We do the right thing long enough," he said, "and eventually people stop wondering why." Sophie wrote on the first paper bag, "Thank you for serving our country," then added a tiny star in the corner. The Rachel Reed Families of Service Fund opened its first office 3 months later in a restored brick building not far from the old rail line, with American flags by the entrance, and a simple plaque beside the door that read, "For the families who kept going after the knock on the door, the hospital call, the final shift, or the empty chair at dinner." Ethan refused to put his own name on the building. Margaret Collins built the governance structure with public audits, independent advisors, and strict rules preventing donors from using families' pain as decoration. The first year, the fund committed more than $4.8 million in scholarships, grief counseling, school transportation, legal support, emergency rent assistance, and college prep tutoring for children of fallen or disabled service members, police officers, firefighters, nurses, and EMTs across North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia. Maya Brooks accepted the advisory role only after Ethan insisted it came with a paid fellowship, tuition support, and the authority to challenge decisions she believed were wrong. She cried in the parking lot after signing the paperwork, then called her father, Sergeant Anthony Brooks, who went silent for a long time before saying, "Baby girl, make sure they help the ones who hate asking." Maya did. She became the person families trusted because she knew what it felt like to sit across from administrators and prove suffering with documents. Ethan attended every monthly meeting, sometimes in a suit, sometimes in the same worn coat, but always with Sophie's fabric star folded in the inside pocket. He still drove the old Ford pickup most days. He still packed Sophie's lunch. He still lived carefully, but he no longer lived hidden. The trust became what Rachel had always believed wealth should be. Not a throne, not a wall, not a scoreboard, but a tool placed in responsible hands. Sophie changed slowly, the way wounded children often do when adults stop demanding a miracle and start building safety. She continued therapy, learned breathing exercises, joined a small speech group at school, and began answering attendance in a voice that trembled but did not disappear. Some children apologized to her because their parents told them to. A few apologized because they finally understood. Madison Harrington left a folded note in Sophie's cubby. That said, "I'm sorry my dad was mean to yours. I should have said something." Sophie kept the note for 2 days before showing Ethan. "Do I have to forgive her?" she asked. Ethan sat beside her on the porch while rain tapped softly on the gutters. The same kind of rain that once made both of them remember the worst night of their lives. "No," he said. "Forgiveness is not homework, but you can decide who you want to become next." Sophie thought about that, then placed the note in a small box, with Rachel's brooch, not as a friendship promise, but as proof that people could learn. Ethan learned too. He stopped punishing himself by refusing every good thing the trust could do. He visited Rachel's grave more often, not only on Memorial Day or anniversaries, and began telling her out loud about the children helped in her name. One afternoon, standing before the headstone with Sophie's hand in his, he finally played Rachel's last voicemail. Her voice came through the phone, warm and rushed, saying she hoped he made it to the rehearsal, but that she loved him either way. Ethan bent forward as if the sentence had gone through his chest. Sophie wrapped both arms around his waist and whispered, "She wasn't mad." Ethan cried then, openly, without turning away from his daughter. It was not weakness. It was the sound of a father finally setting down a guilt he had mistaken for loyalty. 3 years later, the ballroom at the Ballantine looked different when Ethan and Sophie returned for the annual Rachel Reed Families of Service ceremony. The same chandeliers glowed above the same polished floor, but the tables were filled with scholarship families, nurses in modest dresses, firefighters with tired faces, veterans wearing old medals, children with uneven shoes, grandparents raising grandchildren, and donors who had been told clearly that generosity did not purchase control. Sophie, now 12, stood on the stage in a navy dress with Rachel's eagle brooch pinned near her heart, her braid replaced by loose brown waves around her shoulders, her green eyes nervous but steady. Ethan watched from the front row, wearing his father's old military watch, and felt the strange peace of a man who had learned that legacy was not what you left behind in accounts, but what you released into other lives. Sophie stepped to the microphone and held up the small fabric star. "My mom taught my dad to help people," she said. "My dad taught me that staying is love, and a room full of Strangers taught me that we should never wait until someone proves they are important before we treat them with respect. No one laughed this time. No one looked away. In the back of the room, Maya Brooks stood in her nursing school pinning ceremony blazer, helping a little girl whose father had died in a fire find the courage to walk to the stage for her scholarship certificate. Ethan looked at that child and understood that the night of the declined card had not ended with humiliation or revenge. It had ended by opening a door. The Reed Trust was still worth nearly $900 million, rising and falling with markets, properties, contracts, and investments. But Ethan no longer measured his life through any of it. His true wealth was the daughter who had found her voice, the wife whose compassion still moved through strangers, and the families who no longer had to beg powerful people to see their pain. Have you ever helped someone at their lowest moment and discovered that your kindness changed their life forever? Drop a little heart in the comments if you believe love, kindness, and quiet strength are worth more than money, status, or any fortune. Subscribe for more emotional stories about second chances, hidden truth, and the moment a humble heart changes everything. Comment, love has no price tag, if you believe real kindness can change someone's life when they need it most.